Hey, what is going on guys? RVZ Stealth here, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the 80 carry tier list for patch 8.11. Now before we get into the 80 carry tier list, this video is going to be sponsored by Mobalytics. So if you guys have yet to hear of Mobalytics, it's a free app online that has a lot of different tools that will help you improve your game. So one of the core features of the site is the pregame tool. Now what this is going to do for you is when you're loading into a game, you can go into the pregame tab here and you can get a lot of specific information on the enemy team. It will give you information on the exact runes that the enemy team is running. It's going to tell you things like whether or not somebody is on a really big win streak or on a really big loss streak. It's going to tell you things like if somebody on the enemy team is first timing a champion. So you can use all this information here to give yourself an edge and come up with a game plan before you do load into the game. There's also a lot of other tools as well, like the GPI and the post game that you can take a look at when you do go over to the site. So I am going to have a link down in the description below so you guys can take a look at it. Now one thing to note before we get into the tier list is that the sample builds I'll be giving in this video are not 100% set in stone. It's probably going to take at least a few weeks for people to really come up with what's the best #1 build for all 80 carry champions. So don't take these builds as this is what is best right now. This is just what so far in this patch is doing well on these 80 carries, and it's just a guideline as to what you should be looking to run. So starting off in S tier for this patch is going to be Miss Fortune. So Miss Fortune indirectly gets a lot stronger in 8.11. With crit 80 carries getting nerfed in this patch, it allows Miss Fortune to have an even stronger early to mid game because it's going to take these crit 80 carries even longer now to reach their item spikes. And because Miss Fortune can spike off of one item, being like a Youmuu's or a Duskblade, it just allows her to really take over the early game, and she can really punish those 80 carries that are looking for 2 to 3 items to really come online. She also gets indirectly buffed in this patch because Fleet Footwork ends up getting a nerf, so 80 carries and mainly crit 80 carries that are running Fleet Footwork in previous patches also get nerfed in this patch with that change. And then Armor Pen did get buffed as well in this patch, so if you're going for a lethality Armor Pen build on Miss Fortune in this patch, it's going to be even stronger and it's going to give you a very strong mid-game spike. So overall, Miss Fortune is a great 80 carry pick for this patch, especially for the lower ranks. Once you do get up to the very higher elos, Miss Fortune does get a little bit weaker and she probably wouldn't be S tier, but because these tier lists are focused on the majority of the elos and where 99% of the player base is, Miss Fortune is a very good 80 carry and she's S tier for this patch. So second in the S tier for this patch is Draven, another really strong dominant early game 80 carry, so he fits pretty well into the current meta. There's not too many other 80 carries right now that can really match him in the laning phase. Crit 80 carries take longer to spike now, so it just makes Draven an even stronger pick because he can spike off of his one item. He spikes very early on into the game, and because of that, he can just completely destroy the crit 80 carries that will be scaling. Stormrazor is also introduced in this patch, and this item is a very strong rush item on Draven as well. It'll definitely be interesting to see what ends up being the best core build on Draven because there's going to be a lot of different things that are good on him in this patch, but with Stormrazor as a rush item, getting that guaranteed crit there with your Q will just allow you to chunk super hard once you pick up that item in the early game. Now Draven's build path can also be very versatile, which is why I just don't really think he's going to be hit too hard by the crit item changes. Even though crit is what he was building in previous patches, Draven's an AD to where he can go for something like a Bloodthirster Rush, Stormrazor Rush, he could even get an Essence Reaver now in this patch, and even if you don't have crit on Draven, you're still going to be able to deal a ton of damage, which is why I just think he's still going to be a great pick in this patch, and he definitely does not get affected as much as the other 80 carries by the crit item changes. So making his way up to S tier in this patch due to one item change is Lucian. So with Essence Reaver getting its rework in this patch, Lucian now becomes a very strong AD carry pick. He can spike off of one item. Once you pick up Essence Reaver now as Lucian, you gain a really big power spike. Your all-in potential is insanely strong. So I think that in this patch, if you do have a Lucian on your team, and if you're a support player, or you should just ask your support to play one of these aggressive support champions. The Braum Lucian lane should be pretty good in this patch. Thresh, Blitzcrank, any of these strong all-in supports can do really good with Lucian, because once he hits level 6, once he gets his Essence Reaver, then there's pretty much no other AD carry in the game that can actually outduel him once he hits that spike. Now, Blade of the Ruined King and Lord Dominik's also got buffed in this patch, so we might see something like an Essence Reaver, Blade of the Ruined King, Lord Dominik's. We might see Black Cleaver again as well on Lucian in this patch. I don't think we're going to see a ton of crit on him because crit items did get nerfed in this patch, and Lucian doesn't really need crit to be successful. He can hit a really strong mid-game spike with Essence Reaver and something like Blade of the Ruined King, so I think that Lucian is going to be a great early to mid-game AD carry in this patch, and he's just going to fit really nicely into the meta. So a staple in the tier 1s for the past few patches now is Kai'Sa. Now Kai'Sa is similar to Draven in this patch, to where even though crit was a pretty good build path on her in previous patches, her build path is very versatile, so with crit items getting nerfed, it doesn't really affect Kai'Sa. Right now, what's becoming more and more popular on her is the build path of Rageblade, Nashor's, and Deathcap, and this is actually doing very well on her in this patch, and a lot of pro players are running this build now on her. So even though crit did get nerfed, she does have a lot of different build path options, so she is still going to be a very good pick here in 8.11. If there is one thing that would make Kai'Sa a little bit weaker in this patch, it would be the Fleet Footwork Nurse, because that is the rune that most people were running on her, and it is the rune that was doing best on her in 8.10, but she can still go for press the attack and do pretty well with that, so it's really not the end of the world for Kai'Sa with the Fleet Footwork Nurse. She's still going to be a very good pick regardless of the changes to that rune. Like all three of the other AD carries prior, Kai'Sa is also just great for this meta because she can spike off of one item. Rageblade is still way too good on her, and it just synergizes super well with her kit. She also does have a pretty strong mid to late game as well, so there's not really any point in the game where Kai'Sa is really weak. She scales pretty well. She always is going to be relevant in the game, which just makes her a very consistent and very good pick for solo queue. And the final AD carry in the tier 1s for this patch is going to be Ezreal. So Ezreal in 8.11, he doesn't really get too much stronger, he doesn't really get too much weaker either. Blade of the Ruined King buffs and Lord Dominik's buffs, they do help him out a little bit, but you have to keep in mind that those two items on Ezreal usually aren't picked up until your 4th and 5th items, and by that time in the game is probably already won or lost, so having a cost decrease on those two items really aren't going to matter too much in this patch. He is an AD carry though that is going to be spiking a lot sooner than the crit AD carries. 3-item Ezreal build costs 1.2k gold less than a 3-item crit build in 8.11, so he's going to be coming online way sooner than these crit AD carries, and in the mid game, Ezreal in 8.11 should really be able to take over the game against these crit ADs. So for the tier 2 champions in this patch, we've got Varus, Twitch, Ashe, Jhin, and Kog'Maw. So these 5 AD carries here, they're AD carries who don't really get hit too bad by the crit item changes. For Twitch and for Jhin in this patch, both are actually doing very well with a Stormrazor Rush, so their early games aren't as weak as the other crit AD carries because they do actually have a pretty good item that they can spike off of early on in the game. As for Ashe, she is actually doing best right now with a Blade of the Ruined King Rush, so even though in the past crit has been the classic build on Ashe, a Bork Rush is what's doing best for her in this patch, and it does give her a pretty nice early power spike. Now as for Varus and for Kog'Maw, both are statistically performing weaker in this patch, but I feel like it's just mainly because people aren't building them correctly. Do not build crit on these AD carries in this patch. The crit builds just aren't performing very well. What you should be looking to do is go for Rage Blade and then a Nashor's Tooth as your second item, or Blade of the Ruined King as your second item. It does give you a really nice mid-game power spike, and if you are going for crit on these AD carries in this patch, it's just not doing the best. You're going to spike later on into the game, and that's not really what you're looking for on these AD carries. Varus and Kog'Maw are great early to mid-game spiking AD carries, so you want to take advantage of that by building correctly on them. So for the tier 3 picks in this patch, we've got Sivir, Kalista, Tristana, Jinx, and Caitlyn. So for 4 out of those 5 AD carries, excluding Kalista, all of them did get hit by the crit item changes, and they got hit a little bit harder than the champions in the tier 2 because these 4 AD carries, they don't really have the luxury of going for something like a Stormrazor Rush or a Rage Blade or a Blade of the Ruined King, so their early game power spike is pretty much non-existent. They need to get to 2 to 3 items to be effective. They need to reach that mid to late game to really start to come online, which just doesn't really make them great picks for this meta. And then as for Kalista, I no longer think she's the worst AD carry in the game for 8.11. Kalista's an AD who theoretically should fit pretty well into the meta right now because we're more focused on the early game, and Kalista's always been a pretty good early game AD carry. With Rage Blade Rush and with Blade of the Ruined King getting buffed in this patch now, I do think that if you can play a good Kalista, if you can play her early game well, then you should be able to find some success on her in 8.11. So for the tier 4 champions in this patch, we've got Xayah and Vayne, and both of these AD carries got hit the hardest by the crit item changes in this patch. So for Vayne, she's a very weak early game AD carry, and because it takes her longer to scale now, it just doesn't really make her a very good pick for this meta. She's gonna get crapped on in the laning phase by the tier 1 champions in this patch, and you're basically just hoping that your team can carry you through the early to mid game, and you're hoping that you can reach your 3 to 4 items to where you would start to do damage. And then as for Xayah, she actually did get hit pretty hard by the Essence Reaver changes in this patch and by the crit item changes overall. Essence Reaver in previous patches was a really nice rush item on Xayah because it gave her crit, which was really nice for her. It synergized nicely with her E, but because the item, it no longer gives crit anymore, and because she doesn't have the best synergy with the active on it, she can't just use the Essence Reaver active very freely and very aggressively like someone like a Lucian can, for example, because her ultimate, especially once you reach the mid to late game, you're not just going to use it randomly to proc the Essence Reaver active. You're going to be using it to peel yourself. You're only going to be using it when you really need to if someone's diving onto you. So in some team fights, you might not even get to activate the Essence Reaver active, and you might not even get to use that. So overall, I don't think the item's that great on her. The stats don't lie either. The item is statistically not performing very well on her right now in this patch, so she's just overall a lot weaker than in previous patches. So that is going to be all for this video, guys. That was the patch 8.11 AD carry tier list. If you guys did enjoy this video, then be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you have yet to already. Also, be sure to check out Mobalytics down in the description below. And with that being said, guys, thanks for watching. Have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.